And all right, so let's go ahead and get started. So, like I said, this week we are going to cover the topic of abortion and how all the stuff that we've learned about theology of the body up to this point applies to this issue. So, for a recap of last week we talked a lot about mercy and also just how deep God's ocean of mercy is, and lots of stuff about confession and reconciliation and really good stuff. And these are more or less the talking points that you should have gotten from that. So, just keep it in mind that, especially going forward, because more or less we're going to be covering controversial topics from now going forward with theology of the body, that hope is not lost for anybody who is either a victim or a perpetrator of whatever particular sin we might be talking about. God's mercy is really, really great and big. And I highly recommend confession. 10 out of 10, best way to clean your soul. So without further ado, let's get into this. So there are lots of issues that fall under the umbrella of pro-life. And this includes stuff like abortion, euthanasia, capital punishment, immigration, etc. Today we're just going to cover abortion because as I was doing my notes on this particular topic, I realized that abortion was going to be worth an entire session just on its own with how much I wanted to go over and how much I felt was important. So much like other pro-life issues, abortion tends to be the one that takes center stage, but it's not the only one. And I'm more than willing to talk about euthanasia, capital punishment, immigration, and all the other stuff later. But since abortion is the most important one under the pro-life umbrella, that's what we're going to talk about. So some other things to keep in mind before we really start diving into this. All pro-life issues are ultimately about upholding human dignity. All right? That is the core aspect of everything pro-life, is they're just trying to uphold human dignity. And because of that, theology of the body principles apply to pro-life issues, and that's why Catholics are so passionate about being pro-life pretty universally across the board. Now, this next point is where there tends to be actual issue. How you present the truth is more important than what the actual truth or fact that you're talking about, right? Think of the negative stereotype of the abortion. Sorry, thinking how to say it. Think of the negative stereotype of the abortion protester outside of clinics yelling at pregnant girls walking in, right? He might say something that's factually true, but that doesn't mean he's saying it in a way that is courteous to the truth, right? If you turn people off of the truth, then you're doing more damage than good. And this last point, that the truth is like a lion, I forget where I heard it from. Some saint said it somewhere, but the saying goes that the truth is like a lion. You don't need to defend it, you just need to let it loose. And basically what that's saying is, the pro-life position stands with the truth. So you don't need to overcomplicate the facts that you're saying. You just need to present them well, and the truth will do the rest. So, question to you, Matthew: if you're getting rid of weeds, what do you need to do? I'm talking like weeds in the garden. What do you need to do?
We need to pull them all up. Turn up the dirt. Get weed killer for specific weeds and stuff.
Right. And why do you need to turn up the dirt?
So you have all the roots and you get new fresh soil.
Mm-hmm. That's good. That's good. That's what I was looking for. And the reason why I bring this up is because when it comes to the issue of abortion specifically, lots of folks only approach it from the perspective of just getting rid of the flower on the weed instead of pulling up the roots, right? You'll see it a lot whenever and you'll probably see this a lot more, especially when you get older, is when it comes to the abortion debate, lots of folks are just advocating for making it illegal and leaving it at that. But there's more to the issue than just that. And if we really want to see abortion made illegal and society to accept that, we need to get rid of the root of the issue, which isn't just abortion in and of itself. So let's talk about what abortion is, just so we're all on the same page. The Oxford Dictionary defines abortion as the deliberate termination of a human pregnancy, most often performed during the first 28 weeks of pregnancy. So the most important word in that is human. All right. This is one of those instances of the truth speaking for itself. Whenever somebody performs an abortion, there is the end of a human life. Period. That is completely true. And the reason being is pretty surface level philosophy in that humans can only get pregnant with other humans, right? The baby in the womb is a human. Therefore, you are ending the life of a human. This next point is more or less what is the driving force in this belief, and that is that life begins at conception, right? You'll see it whenever you dive into Catholic sources like the Catechism. There are also several Bible verses that support it as well. But the other thing is biologists in the past decades have been coming around to life beginning at conception. Whenever I was doing research, I found that in some surveys, basically about 90+% of biologists that were surveyed on the question of when does life begin said life begins at conception because that's whenever life functions start beginning. And then another interesting thing is you'll often hear the baby in the womb described as a fetus. That's kind of the medical term for it, right? And fetus in Latin means offspring. So you might hear in some debates whenever you're doing this research that the pro-choice side tends to call the baby in the womb a fetus. But just know that that means offspring. So there you go. Another thing you might hear a lot is when does life, again, this goes back to when life begins. The three main arguments I hear is it isn't human until so many number of weeks have passed in the pregnancy. It isn't human until it has a heartbeat. It isn't human until it can survive by itself outside the womb. I've heard all of these whenever discussing this issue with people who don't believe in the pro-life position. And DNA disagrees with this. Let's take the phrase "life begins at conception" out of the equation, right? Whenever conception occurs, so whenever a sperm and an egg meet and form a zygote, a unique DNA signature is created, right? A unique human DNA is created, one that can't be replicated. All right, that is a definitive point when we can say these two things weren't human and now they are. Therefore, life begins at conception. So this is really where the core of the argument goes down. So just want you to keep that in mind. And now let's start getting to the roots. Matthew, why do you think women get abortions? And if you need a second to think, take your time.
They can't financially support the baby, or they weren't expecting to get pregnant, or the medication they took didn't work on them.
Right. So economic reasons, failed birth control, and that's basically what you're saying? Anything else?
Or the father left.
Or the father left, okay. So no support. And basically, whenever I was doing my research to find out, what are the reasons women get abortion, those are more or less some of the main reasons. I kind of broke these 6 points down into two subcategories. You got economic reasons, which include they're in poverty right now, would derail career or academic goals, no parental or family support, And then situational reasons as well, like birth defects, danger to the mother, and the most awkward of all, rape. And now we're going to go through each of these and talk about why these aren't good reasons. So let's start with poverty. So again, the idea is we're trying to get rid of the root of the issue. Well, if the reason why a woman is seeking an abortion is poverty, then the solution is solve poverty, right? Much easier said than done. And so naturally I dug into research, and it felt pretty awkward typing into Google, how do you solve poverty? But one of the things I found were lots of research papers about what are the causes of poverty, and the number one thing they mentioned was lack of education. So it stands to reason then that if we want to end abortion, we should also advocate for better education or easier to access education, and better education opportunities outside of the public school system. And from that leads to better job training. Another thing that was mentioned was lack of job skills. And from education comes job skills. So one solution would lead into another. And then another thing would be recruitment networks. There are lots of ways people get jobs. And one of those ways is by like recruitment firms or other things. And I know this is starting to sound a little vague, like, are we trying to solve abortion by advocating for better ways people can get employed? And yeah, it is. Because if you take out the economic strain, then that number goes down. And when that number goes down, the desire for it goes down, which will make it easier to advocate for abolishing it as a whole. And then the last bit here was affordable childcare. Matthew, you probably haven't had any experience with this, but daycares are expensive, like really expensive. And that can put a huge economic strain on a single parent. Let's say the hypothetical situation of a single mother who chose life and is now having to pay lots of money for daycare when sending her kid to a private school would have been cheaper. So reason number 2, career or academic roadblocks. So some of this is anecdotal evidence. Others are things that I discovered in my research. But when it comes to colleges, right? So the main example for these sort of roadblocks come in the example of, say, a college senior who's on her last semester, gets pregnant, doesn't have any support from the father of the child, has to raise a child on her own, and has to drop out of school now because she isn't financially able to support herself and the child, or she's not able to juggle college and the child, all those reasons. So here's the truth. When it comes to colleges, they are not legally allowed to discriminate against parents. That is part of Title IX, which encompasses a lot of things, but they are not allowed to discriminate against parents. And the other thing is that financial aid is very flexible for people who are parents for this exact reason. Adults of all ages and backgrounds end up in college and need and seek financial aid. There are circumstances for this. And if the circumstances change, you just go and talk to your financial aid person and see what they can do. And usually if you have a dependent, which would be in this case a child, then you're usually eligible for a lot more financial aid than you would be before. And the other thing is, every single college I've both visited and attended, there has been cheap childcare for whenever you're in class. So those three are just boom, boom, boom right there. Now, when it comes to careers, like say working woman, again, employers are not allowed to discriminate against a mother. They're not. It is another violation. And the other thing is, quite frankly, companies understand this and they want people to have personal lives. That's the reason why people make money. It is in order to have personal lives. And putting this unnecessary roadblock in there where it's just like, oh, you got to choose your career or the child, complete nonsense. That would be opening up that company for a lawsuit. So there's no legal reason why this situation should occur already. No parental support. So this one is more on a case-by-case basis, right? Now, I will say, overwhelmingly, if the biological father is positively identified, so they've done a DNA test and they know who the father is, then child support laws kick in. Otherwise, similar solutions as these past two slides. Advocate for affordable health or child care and financial aid if you're seeking college stuff, or companies can't fire you for being a parent. So that's kind of the broad stroke on that. But again, this one is more on a case-by-case basis, because sometimes it's a matter of, I don't have any family support as well, or whatever. So you get what I'm saying. This one's very case-by-case, but overall, child support laws are a thing. So now let's get into the situational stuff. This is whenever the conversation really starts getting hard, because one of the main reasons listed in developed countries, so first world countries like the United States or Britain or Iceland, is birth defects are a contributing cause to reasons for women to get abortions. What ends up happening is that biology has advanced to such a degree where you can diagnose a child in the womb with whatever health conditions might occur genetically. Now, this isn't completely foolproof, but it tends to be fairly accurate, right? And because of this, and I mentioned Iceland pretty specifically because a couple of years back, Iceland started bragging that they had solved autism. They had cured autism, and people were asking, how is that so? How did you cure it? And they say, we didn't cure it. We just abort the babies who are diagnosed with autism in the womb. Our doctors recommend abortion for children that are diagnosed before they're born. And as somebody who has friends who are on the spectrum, they really don't appreciate being told they're better off dead. That is just 101 sort of stuff. And it's also a violation of human dignity to assume that somebody with a birth defect is less human, therefore it's okay to kill them. And this doesn't just apply to people on the autism spectrum. It could be physical defects, like your child is going to be born without hands, or another popular one is cleft lips, which, if you don't know, a cleft lip is whenever a piece of a lip is missing. And it doesn't look pretty per se, but they're still completely human, and mentally they're all there, and everything is fine otherwise. But these are listed as reasons for abortion in other countries. So again, this would be more, to solve this, it's more of sweeping cultural change, which would really need to emphasize the humanity of people with birth defects, whatever it may be. And I also mentioned there in the middle point that fatal defects aren't always immediately fatal. Sometimes the doctor will diagnose, hey, this child is going to have a huge heart defect. But again, those diagnoses aren't 100% accurate all the time. And again, that doesn't logically make it okay for the child to not have a chance to live. Because in the course of my research, I did discover several instances where the doctor recommended termination because of a fatal defect, but the parents chose life, and then the child was able to live a happy life into adulthood and is still going strong. And of course, there were other cases where the child passed away at an early age, but the parents still said that that life was still a life worth living. So there you go. That's on birth defects. Danger to the mother. This one is an interesting one because it is actually virtually a non-issue. What do I mean by that? There is never a medical need for an abortion to be performed. What this actually ends up meaning is there are a handful of instances, like say cervical or uterine cancer whenever a woman is pregnant, where the child being in the womb decreases the chance for a successful surgery and would result in increased danger for the mother. But we're talking, and again, this is more on a case-by-case basis, and we're talking just chances go up if the baby is not there. And so the doctor could recommend aborting the child in order to increase the chances of a successful surgery for the mother. But again, there are lots of instances of parents saying, no, we don't want to do that, and then being able to have a successful surgery anyway. Or some instances where they're like, can we just induce labor right now? And then the child is born early, and they're able to keep the child alive in order to get past being premature. Not ideal, and then both survive. Or some instances where the child survives but the mother doesn't. You'll find all sorts of stories across the web like that. And overall, it remains the same, that the child is not, like, the child's not a burden here. Or I should rephrase that. It's not that the child's not a burden. It's that the child is still innocent, right? And so he deserves the human dignity that it deserves as a child. Yeah, so that's basically all I have to say on this issue. You might encounter this sort of hypothetical going forward, and basically that's what they mean by this. So I always find it useful to clarify, like, no, there's no medical need for an abortion. What you're actually talking about is this. And even then, that's on a case-by-case basis. So moving on. The awkward one. So when it comes to rape, straight up, rape is bad. We all agree that. Nobody's going to say it's not. But oftentimes whenever abortion bills are brought in and there needs to be a quote-unquote rape exception, this issue gets brought up all the time because it seems extremely heartless whenever you're staying logically consistent with the pro-life position to say that no, rape shouldn't be an exception. But the truth of the matter is that rape should not be an exception. And here's the reason why. The child had nothing to do with that rape. Period. Had absolutely nothing to do with it. It's like we're giving the death sentence to somebody who is completely innocent of the crime of sexual misconduct. And what I found in my research was lots and lots of testimonies, right? Testimonies from women who had been raped and conceived children from that, and how their motherhood was the thing that kept them mentally stable in the recovery process from the trauma of their rape. Or, again, I also found testimonies of children who were conceived out of rape, who were very passionate advocates for, the joy they brought into their mother's lives and how grateful they were that their mother chose life. And again, they don't appreciate being told that they were better off dead because of the circumstance of which they came into the world. And then I also found, pretty disturbingly, testimonies of women who received abortions after they were raped, and lots of them saying that the abortion they received was worse than their actual rape. Long story short, rape doesn't make abortion okay, and it never will. Another additional argument that I found whenever I was going through this was that women are going to get abortions anyway, so make them legal so that way they're safer and can be regulated. So here are the issues with that, right? It presumes that women need abortions in order to survive, which, is ridiculous. But it also presumes that that because the law is going to be broken, that we should just make it legal. So here's the thing about the law, all right, and why people advocate for the law to reflect the morality of whatever they feel is moral. And especially as Catholics and as pro-life Catholics, that we advocate for pro-life laws. Laws reflect the morality of society, right? So as a society, since we said murder is wrong, that's an objective fact. Murder is wrong. Stealing is wrong. Tax evasion is wrong. Destruction of property is wrong. I could go on and on and on. The fact that those things are illegal doesn't mean that people don't break them, that there aren't instances where people break them. But what it says is, without a shadow of a doubt, objectively, that these things are immoral and that society shouldn't tolerate them. And that's where the issue of this line of reasoning comes in. Because essentially, like I said, it's saying that that abortion should be legal because people would just break the law. And to which I would say, well, yes, people do break the law. That's going to happen with any law that exists, is people are going to find a way to break it. But again, it shows the morality of society when you say that no, this should be illegal because it's the killing of a human being, period. As a further side note, there have been attempts by pro-life people to increase safety standards on abortion facilities, especially in the past few years. You might not remember it, but about 6 or so years ago, I think, a senator or a representative, a Texas legislator by the name of Winnie Davis, lobbied for, or she filibustered for 12 hours. Filibusters whenever you just give a speech in order to stop a vote. So she did that for 12 hours, so that way Texas wouldn't pass an abortion regulation law where that demanded that abortion facilities increase their safety standards to meet standard hospital safety standards. Stuff like the hallways need to be wide enough for 2 stretchers to go past, and sanitation standards. Just a whole bunch of things where it's like, okay, I'm not going to pretend like it wasn't the Texas legislator completely calling the bluff of the pro-choice side. It definitely was saying, okay, you want abortion to be safe, legal, and rare? Let's make it safe then. And then abortion advocates and pro-choice politicians protested against that law because it would ultimately result in a bunch of abortion facilities being closed, which it was definitely going to do. But that also tells us as a society that these places aren't up to code, and also that they have very loose regulations compared to anything else. So that's a bit disturbing on the political side of this. But ultimately, again, if it's about safety, then it should be about safety. But this argument very rarely is. So that was a lot. Let's chat about it, Matthew. Tell me what stood out.
I think it was just like all the everyone has their own like opinion, but like in the end, it's really just like so everyone that does have an abortion or wants one or has had one, like really, it could have more or less all been avoided if the cities or if the government does things different.
Yeah, yeah, there is a legislative side of
So
things.
basically, abortion wouldn't exist if things were cheaper
Mm-hmm.
for particular circumstances.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And you know, I'm not going to pretend like that the way society is right now also isn't a significant contributing factor to it as well, right? I think I definitely touched on that with the previous slides, but yeah, it's one of those things where it's, we don't want abortion to happen because it's the killing of a human being, so let's tackle the root of the issue. You say A, B, C, D, E, F is the reason why, so let's handle each of those one by one, and then we'll go from there. And definitely the economic issues are, by and large, the majority of the reasons why women get abortions. So you take those out, and suddenly the numbers go down, which is a silver lining at least. And if society has no need for abortion, then it won't exist. So that's part of the pro-life advocacy as well. Have you heard anything else about abortion you'd like to discuss? I know I covered some major, like, kind of high-level stuff here, but Is there a particular situation? Maybe, like, I don't know. What is there another like what if scenario that you might have?
Not really. The only other one that I've heard is the my body, my choice type thing.
Right. Yeah.
So,
Yeah. And when it comes to the argument of my body, my choice, again, it's not really philosophically sound because that presupposes that the child in the womb is part of the mother's body instead of being its own separate entity. If my body, my choice was taken to its logical conclusion, then I would still be part of my mother's body, and you would still be part of your mother's body, and so on and so forth. And because of that, our mothers would have legal jurisdiction to potentially terminate us. That's where the logical conclusion of that comes in. And um, and yeah, again, that doesn't justify the killing of a human being because it side skirts the issue. Um, so that's ultimately what it comes down to. It's like we're trying not to kill human beings. We understand there are these other issues. Let's tackle those other issues too while we say let's not kill human beings. Um, so just to kind of wrap up, what do we do going forward now? So the main thing you should do is when you talk the talk, you should also walk the walk. And that's true for everything in life, but especially for something like this. Um, what should you do? Assist in pro-life advocacy. That's stuff like the March for Life that happens. There's a local one that happens in Houston every year, and there's also the national one that happens in DC. There are a bunch of local ones that happen at different cities across the U.S. When I was living in Dallas, I would go to the Dallas one every year. Whenever you get to be voting age, definitely vote for propositions as well as politicians who advance pro-life policies, because that's the way to handle it on that side. But there's also nonprofits and other pro-life organizations that are on the front lines doing stuff. So donate or volunteer at those organizations like pro-life pregnancy centers. And then, of course, advocate for assistance to single mothers and tie up the gaps in the system wherever they may exist. So, let's say we hypothetically solve all 6 of those issues that I brought up, as well as any other issues that you might think of. Let's say something new comes up. It's like, okay, let's just get rid of that. Boop. Because again, we want to create a society where abortion is unthinkable. And that would be the way to do it, is you get rid of the reasons why. You pull out the weed by its roots. And then, of course, the other aspect is advocating for an end to legal abortion. Because again, you cut off the head and then you pull out the roots. You get rid of the reasons why people will want it, legally or illegally, and then you make it illegal to show this is what society values. And then there are some examples of pro-life organizations I want to tell you about. So the Sisters of Life, which unfortunately neither of us can join, but can still assist in other ways. They are a convent. They have a couple of different locations. I know they have one in New York City and they have one in Denver, Colorado. But basically, these ladies are literally on the front line. One issue that they discovered in New York City whenever they started is that in New York City, there's a huge culture of cohabitation, so people who are not married living together. And what would happen is if the woman in that cohabiting relationship got pregnant and didn't want to abort her child, then suddenly there was a chance that she would end up homeless because the father doesn't want to take care of that child. So you got homeless pregnant women in New York City. What the Sisters of Life do is they take those women in. They take them in, they help them get on their feet, they give them job skills if they need them, and they help them take care of their child for the first 6 months, and then they follow up with them afterwards. So the Sisters of Life are awesome, absolutely awesome. And I bring them up, but there are plenty of other smaller organizations that do similar work. I didn't think to look one up in the Houston area, but I know that up in Dallas there was an organization that I would frequently donate to called the Bella House, which more or less did the same thing. They would take in homeless pregnant women and help them get on their feet, and they would teach them job skills if they need them, and send them out to go be self-sustaining. This next organization is called Save the Storks. Now, what they do is they send vans around to different abortion facilities, and they provide sonograms for free. That's what they do. And then if the woman chooses to keep her baby, they give them options on, here are ways to get help if you need it, one way or the other. Oftentimes, what happens whenever women go and get an abortion is the abortion clinic where it occurs, they don't talk about other options. They just kind of get them in, get them out as soon as they can without going into details. And basically what comes out of that is lots of women who feel like they didn't have any other option but to get an abortion, and that they felt like they couldn't stop once they were going in. And again, to kind of poke at the logical value of pro-choice is let them know what their choices are. And that's what Save the Storks does. Plus, the other thing is lots of states require women to get a sonogram before they go in to their abortion, their abortion, when they go in for their procedure. Thanks, Ed. Yeah, when they go in for their procedure. So, again, if women so choose, then Save the Storks is like, okay, here's your sonogram for free. As far as the political advocacy side of things, the Texas Pro-Life Commission is one of them. Basically, these guys give the pro-life seal of approval to politicians, to mixed results, I will admit. But at the very least, they're the ones who are on the legislative side saying, hey, you voted against this pro-life thing. We're going to make sure people know about that. Or you voted for this pro-life thing. We're going to make sure people know about that. And they'll release voters' guides before every election so people know what the pro-life records are for different politicians. And then Catholic Charities is another one. Obviously, Catholic Charities does more than just abortion stuff. They also handle feeding the poor and giving shelter and a bunch of other things that are also under the pro-life umbrella.
They were the largest adoption agency in the state of New York before New York outlawed religious organizations doing adoptions.
Yeah. So just so y'all can hear it here, just in case, they were the largest adoption agency in New York State before New York State outlawed religious organizations being able to do adoption. So they've been around for a while. They do really good stuff. There are local chapters everywhere. I use my Amazon Smile to donate to Catholic Charities of Houston for that exact reason. Let's see. Yeah, I think that just about covers everything on that. I feel like I'm forgetting something, but overall, if I were to sum it up, it's that women who get an abortion feel like they don't have a way to get out of whatever the root cause is. And as pro-life people, it is our obligation and our duty to show them that there are ways to be a mother in this world and succeed at it, and for relief from the causes that might lead them to abortion. And through that, we uphold the sacredness of life, which is the call of us as Catholics as well. All right. Any questions, Matthew?
No, that really just covered everything that I've already learned or known from going to the protests or praying outside the abortion clinics in Louisville. So.
All right, good stuff, man. Good stuff. So I'll go ahead and put an end to the recording.